I hear my clock striking downstairs, so I know it's time. Welcome. I'm Paul Robichaux, the Chief Technology Officer at Quadratec, and you've joined our webinar on Nova for Radar customers. Joining me today, I have the most excellent Doug Davis, who is a product owner of our reporting product lines. If you're happy using Radar right now, then you have Doug and his team to thank for it, because the work that they did is what helped us get Radar into the market and then turn it into the reporting components of the Nova platform that I'm going to be talking about today. So let's get started. Quick agenda. I'm going to spend a minimal amount of time talking about sort of the context of how Quadratec got to be where we are and how reporting technology has changed. Because the fact of the matter is, if you came up in a time of on-prem exchange, you're probably used to hearing things like Promodag reports or Crystal reports. But the world has changed quite a bit, and the technologies we use to report on the services in Office 365 have had to change along with them. I'm going to talk briefly about some of the management challenges with Office 365. There's a lot of good in the cloud, but there are some things that the cloud makes more difficult or even impossible. And part of what we have tried to do with the Nova platform is figure out ways to solve those problems and to make the impossible actually doable. Then I want to talk about the Nova platform itself, what it is, why we keep calling it a platform instead of a product, and some of the things that it can do. Mixed in with that, you're going to see some demos from Doug, showcasing some of the changes we're making in the Nova reporting platform compared to the Radar tool set. Then at the end, we'll save some time for questions. If you have questions, you're welcome to submit them through the chat interface now, and Laura, our moderator, will take them and make sure that they get to the right person. But with that said, let's get started. So this nifty Nito diagram basically shows a timeline of how Quadratec came to be. We were founded in 2011 with a focus on migrating data from on-prem into the cloud. So the products you see there, PSD Flight Deck, Mailbox Shuttle, Archive Shuttle, we're all focused on migrating data that you held in your on-prem environment to someplace else. We've been very successful with that. We are by far the market leader in Vault and archive migrations because our products are really good, our people are great. What else would you expect me to say, right? But that's not what we're here for. We're not here to talk about archives today. Instead, we're here to talk about reporting. So in 2016, we acquired Cogmotive. At the time, they were the market leader in Office 365 reporting and analytics. That leadership continued when we rebranded the Cogmotive product as Radar Reporting. In 2017, though, we did something else that was a little unexpected by the market, and that was to introduce a product to migrate data between Office 365 tenants. That's our Cloud Commander product. Builds on our heritage of building migration stuff, but it started to open up some possibilities that we realized in more depth in 2018 when we shipped Autopilot. Now, it has to be said, I will forever be mad at Microsoft that they stole our Autopilot trademark, because they totally did. We shipped ours first, and then they shipped Windows Autopilot, which has led to a lot of confusion because those two products do completely different things. But with that said, Autopilot started to show some of the possibilities of having a connected platform for doing Office 365 management. And so starting in 2018, we took a really hard look at what we were doing with reporting, with migration, and with Office 365 management, and decided that we needed to unify those into a single platform. A big driver for this was the motion in the market, as evidenced by Gartner, toward a concept of having SaaS management platforms instead of individual solutions. Now, park that thought for a second before I go on to talk about the platform, and let's pivot about reporting technology. So really, before 2007, you could build or buy reporting, but it was like the Wild West out there. And the reason I say that is, for example, when I wrote the Exchange Server Cookbook, or co-wrote it, there were at least 5 APIs that you had to use to get data out of different parts of Exchange. So there was CDO, CDO-EXM, WMI. There were a couple of other scriptable interfaces. You could do some relatively nasty things by parsing logs and using that to gather statistical data. And so reporting products were sort of all over the map in terms of what they were able to show and how useful it was. But at the same time, the big thing that most of us cared about in that era was, how much disk space am I using? right? If you get right down to it, that was the number one thing is, when am I going to run out of disk space or transaction log space? How much time do I have? And who has the large mailboxes so I can go yell at them and tell them to delete some stuff? So starting with Exchange 2007, Microsoft started to expose reporting data through PowerShell. Now, the good news is that made it much easier to get consistent data even in large environments. But the bad news is that at the time, it sounds bad if I say PowerShell wasn't quite ready for prime time. But the fact of the matter is there were some limitations in terms of what data items you could get, how long it took to get them, and how well and how robust solutions built on top of PowerShell could be. But this is really a time frame when we started to see people blossoming into building their own purpose-built line of business reporting applications using PowerShell. Because with PowerShell, with having a single API to get all of the data that you might want about mailbox and mail activity and server health and capacity and utilization, it really became possible for you to build your own script that would gather just the report data that you cared about and package it in a way that was useful to you. Now, when Exchange Online came on the scene, though, we started to have a different problem. Not all of the data that you would want to know about was available in Exchange Online. Microsoft made a very conscious decision to say, look, there are some things about the service, which is always how they refer to it, about the service in capital letters, that we want to be private. You don't need to know how DAGs are configured in the service. You don't need to know how many disks there are. That's none of your business, right? You're paying Microsoft to hide that and just deliver large mailboxes at low cost. So what that meant from a reporting standpoint is that our focus in looking at reporting and analytics data had to change too, because we weren't allowed to care what percentage of CPU the server was using or how much free disk space there was. We're much more focused on things like, hey, is this working? Is mail flowing where it's supposed to? Are users able to get in and use the service that I'm paying for? So in 2014 through 2017, the way that I like to think of this is sort of a market evolution and consolidation phase. So that's when Cogmotive came into the market. That's when we rebranded it as Radar. There's some other competitive products like eNow's Mailscape 365 that came in during this time frame. And Microsoft really became the biggest competitor for everybody in the reporting space because they put some reports into the Office 365 and Azure portals. Now, the thing to understand about Microsoft's reporting solutions, it's tempting to say they're worth what you pay for them, haha. But the fact of the matter is some of those reports are more useful than others, but all of them are limited, right? Your ability to search and sort and filter, your ability to choose data retention, your ability to customize, those are all very limited by what you get in Microsoft's free reports in the portal. And the biggest limitation there is that you only get the reports that Microsoft wants you to have. So really interesting philosophical discussion. If any of you are coming to Ignite, I invite you to come by booth 841 and talk to me about it. We can have a really interesting discussion about, okay, why did Microsoft choose the reports they did? And the short answer is because those reports are good for them. If they happen to also be good for you, then that's awesome, but that's not why they're there. So 2018 and onward, Microsoft has bet all in on the Microsoft Graph. As a matter of fact, Satya Nadella mentioned the Graph over and over and over and over again in all the propaganda around the Surface Duo and the Surface Neo announcement last week. And you might wonder, okay, why is he talking about the Graph from a device standpoint? Well, Microsoft says the Graph is what's going to power all of their applications for data access, for reporting, for analytics, for security, for machine learning and AI insights. All those things are going to be powered by Graph. Now, when I say Microsoft doesn't effectively capitalize on it yet, the interesting thing here is that there's a lot of stuff that you could potentially do with the Graph that is not implemented yet. Microsoft has not yet replaced all the PowerShell calls that we use to get reporting data and to take action with Graph equivalents yet. And there's some stuff that still requires you to do portal things that don't yet have Graph equivalents, but that's coming. The other note that's interesting is the last one. Reporting starts to be incorporated into SaaS management. So what we're starting to see is a trend throughout the industry where people who make software to manage SaaS systems, and I'm not just talking about Office 365, any SaaS system, they've started to incorporate more and more reporting and analytics to help people understand how the SaaS capability is being used. So what does this mean for us from an Office 365 standpoint? I'm not going to take the time to read this entire diagram and talk about each one of these points, because I can sum up the key challenges a lot more briefly. Microsoft controls the environment and you don't. So managing it is harder than you're used to with a purely on-prem environment. The trade-off is managing it is harder, it's more time consuming, etc., but you don't have to spend as much time doing basic maintenance anymore. Okay, for those of you who have lived in an apartment or a townhome or another shared space, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The trade-off is you have a smaller space that you don't fully control, but now you no longer have to cut the grass or worry about what happens if the hot water heater breaks. That's someone else's maintenance responsibility. So when you look around this circle, what all these problems have in common is that because Microsoft has taken more control of the environment by providing this as a cloud service, they also have taken away a lot of the autonomy and visibility that we need to manage it effectively. Because at the end of the day, when you're supporting end users, you can't point the finger at Microsoft and say, oh, sorry, this is broken. That's Microsoft's fault. That only goes so far. That's not what people want to hear when you're telling them why they can't get their email or why SharePoint is down, etc. So what we decided to try to do is build a platform that would effectively address these challenges and make them better. The way that we decided to do that was by taking the core technology behind Radar, which was market-leading reporting platform, behind Autopilot, which was our market-leading automation platform, and put them together with some stuff that I'm going to be talking about shortly into a single platform for Office 365 management. Now, if you look at the key deliverables that we were gunning for with this strategy, we wanted to give you visibility throughout the entire organization, no matter how large your organization is, no matter how many tenants you have in it, no matter where they're located. So I would want to deliver on this vision by giving you reporting tools that let you gather all the data from all the sources throughout Office 365, Intune, the Microsoft 365 SKUs, and so on. Put it all in one place and let you, with great granularity, pick and choose what you want to see and how you want to see it. Then the ability to action insights. I want to give you that data and ideally show you some things about your data that you didn't already know, but tie that to a platform that lets you take action, with those actions being driven through and by a very granular role-based access control or attribute-based access control system. For those of you that have used RBAC in Exchange Online and Office 365, you know that the concept behind RBAC is really sound, but Microsoft's implementation, let's just say there are some lumps in the pudding. There are some things that are very difficult to do with Microsoft's RBAC that people badly want to be able to do. One of which is the ability to assign and define policies that control what individual administration actions people can take. Notice I said people and not administrators, because one of the key problems that we see with the existing Office 365 platform is that to be able to do a lot of things you want to do, you have to have administrative rights. And the problem is often you don't want to give those rights to the people who need them to get the work done. Okay, I'll talk about why that is when I talk more about delegation and policy control. But we want to be able to give you tools to define these policies that specify what people can do, where they can do it, what they can what objects they can take action on, and then enforce those policies and still give people, where it makes sense and where you approve it, the ability to take self-service actions so that they can do things on their own without having to drag IT into it. So it's a little note at the bottom. If you want to know more about the vision, about our roadmap for delivering on this, we're happy to have that conversation through your sales representative. They can arrange an NDA and we can get really deep into the guts of what we're talking about doing. But for our purposes, this slide that we call the 5 pillars, I think sums it up pretty well. We want a single platform that unifies migration integration. So all the data that comes from migration about which mailboxes and objects are where, who's in prem, who's in which tenants in the cloud, whether you're consolidating multiple tenants into one, whether you're supporting mergers and acquisitions, doing vault migrations, whatever it is you're doing on the migration side, if anything, we want that data to feed into the reporting pillar. Now, because all of you are here, the reason you're here is because you're customers of Radar. Number one, thank you for that. Right? You put food on my kids' table, and I appreciate that. And I take that responsibility very seriously of supporting you guys. But number two, we wanted reporting to get better in Nova. We wanted to be able to pull in more data from more places, give you more ways to look at it, give you better tools for building and sharing your own reports, and give you tools for driving adoption. Now, the reason adoption is listed here under reporting is that if you don't have data to drive your adoption decisions, you're not making adoption decisions, you're just shouting at people to start using a technology, right? You're essentially telling them to paddle faster. But with data, you can look to see who's adopted, who is adopting, who is not yet adopted, and make some really interesting business decisions about how to proceed and what technologies to use and where that you can't make without that data. So really, these pillars are all shown the same height on this chart, but reporting is sort of the linchpin that makes all these things work. Then we have security and audit. So some of you are customers of our existing Radar security and audit product, and you know how much it speeds up your ability to do investigation of things like compromised accounts. Okay, we wanted to preserve everything that was good about Radar security and audit, but make it better by enabling you to do things like combine audit data with other data sources. So you'll be able to see shortly, I can take a report that ordinarily would just have information about how much or who, and add to it data about when and what actions users take. The key thing to remember about security and audit in Nova, we don't intend this to be a replacement for your security tool set. It's not an intrusion detection system. It's not host-based countermeasures. It's a way for you to quickly investigate what users have done or are doing in your Office 365 environment so that you understand what they're doing and you can take whatever actions are appropriate based on that understanding. Delegation of policy control shifts the game a little bit. So migration integration, reporting, and security and audit are all about gathering more data and being able to make sense of it. DPC is about being able to very selectively give the right people control to do the right things with the right level of access without having to give everybody global administrator. So if you imagine a slider that on the left is 0, nobody has administrative rights to do anything, and IT has to take every action from installing a printer driver to creating a computer account to onboarding a user. That's one extreme. The other extreme, and this is what you see at a lot of small organizations, is lots of people have permission to do lots of things. Well, what we want to do is we want to help you get closer to that left-hand side by saying, okay, I'm going to give access to certain operations to certain people, but I'm not going to give them permission to do things that I don't want them to do. I'm not going to give them global admin or Teams admin or SharePoint admin roles. I'm not going to let them be domain admins on my on-prem environment, but I'm still going to let them do some of the things that a user would normally have to have those roles to do. Then the final piece, service monitoring, is something I get really excited about. We're giving you the ability to see in real time what service conditions look like across Microsoft's global infrastructure. So you can think of this like a global satellite weather map that shows you, is it raining in Morocco right now? Is it sunny in Seattle? Is it fiendishly hot in Alabama? Okay, our map will tell you those things. But we also give you the ability to run your own monitoring beacons wherever your users are to give you real-time information about the specific conditions that your users are running into. And then if I were going to draw this as a different diagram, what I'd be showing is that reporting data flows into DPC, service monitoring data flows back into reporting. So I can do things like at the end of the month, push a button and have a report that says, hey, here's the SLA or the service level that Microsoft provided for Exchange Online in North America for my users. Or here's what my global SLA looked like for Microsoft Teams across my entire worldwide organization. That's really valuable data. And when you think about all the other data sources that we have in the platform, you can then cross that data and see things like, well, okay, here's what the SLA looked like, and here's the number of service tickets that I had filed. Or here's what that SLA looked like, and here is what the data from the call quality dashboard shows. Now, just to be clear, we don't yet grab the data from the call quality dashboard because there is no publicly released API for that. But the minute Microsoft starts exposing that, we're going to start grabbing that data. And that's one of the big advantages of the Nova platform, is that very quickly we can pivot. Whenever Microsoft introduces a new data source, we can start consuming it and showing it. So what does this mean for you as a Radar customer? Let's pivot and talk about that. Number one question I get from people: how do I get to Nova? And is it going to cost me any money? So the short answer, right? No, it won't. If you have an existing Radar subscription, we can move you to Nova at no additional cost, and that will give you Nova reporting and the Nova Adoption Accelerator. The delegation and policy control is a separate module that's licensed separately. I would very much like to talk to anyone who's interested in learning more about that, to tell you way more than you want to know about it and talk about how you might be able to add that onto your subscription. But this is a big thing that people want to know, is what is it going to cost me to get moved? So now we sort of have that out of the way. If you have other questions about the transition, we'll talk more about that later in the webinar too, but I'm happy to answer those as well. So just pop them into the chat window. We'll get to them in the Q&A period. But let's talk about the specific improvements, right? Because this is really the core of why Nova reporting is an improvement over Radar reporting, because we've done some very specific things to make it better. So the first is that we've rewritten the data gathering engine. It's codenamed Kojak. And during the course of developing Nova, we went from Kojak version 1 to Kojak version 3. So some of you have been running on Kojak version 2 during this transition period using Radar and didn't even know it, but that was a test bed for us, because in Radar right now we have thousands of customers and millions of mailboxes that we manage. So the ability to prove our data gathering engine and prove the improvements during that time was really invaluable to us. So the big takeaways from the new engine are that, number one, we can get more data from more places. Number two, we can get the data more quickly. And to be more precise, what I mean is we can add new data sources much faster than we could, and add new reports even faster, compared to the amount of time that it took for us to get those into Radar. We've made a bunch of behind the scenes performance improvements to improve how quickly we get data from Microsoft, where we can. Keep in mind that we're still at their mercy, as every other product is. So if they have an outage where they're delaying putting data into the repository that we get it from, then we can only display the data that Microsoft puts into that repository. The good news is we have had that happen enough over the last 18 months or so that we've significantly improved our ability to tell when Microsoft is running behind or when they're dropping data, so that we can tell you. This enables us to proactively tell you, hey, Microsoft is normally about 18 hours behind on this data source, and now it looks like they're 36 or 48 or 72 hours behind, which in turn means that when you look at a report, you can be confident that it has the latest data that Microsoft has made available, and that you know how fresh it is. Fresh in this case is a technical term meaning not old and stale. So we want you to know more about the quality of the data that we're ingesting, because that quality passes straight through to the reports that you're using to make decisions about what happens in your environment. Okay, the next improvement is richer reports. So the key thing here is that with more data sources available to us and a new engine for displaying and creating reports, we can now do combination reports that show you more than one thing at a time. I'm going to let you in on a little bit of a secret. Doug, cover your ears. But most reporting vendors who talk about the number of reports that they have in their product are not telling you that they may have the same report just for 7, 14, 30, 60 days. So for example, I know of one competing product that says that they have 300 and some reports, but if you go through and look at the number of unique reports they have, it's nowhere near that number, because they will take the inbound good mail report, for example, for 1 day, 7 days, 30 days, and 60 days, and say that that's 4 separate reports. We've gone in the opposite direction, right? The technology we have in Nova lets us combine different report or different sections, we call them, into a single report, which means every time you print this report, every time you export it, every time you schedule it to be emailed, all of the data you need to see in a single report goes together. So you no longer have to worry about looking up data across 5 or 6 different reports to get a consolidated picture of what's happening in your tenant. You can see just from this static screenshot that I've got multiple sections here, mixing charts and a conventional data grid. What you haven't seen is that there are a whole bunch of new report item or display types that we have, including heat maps and timelines. So what I'm going to do now is ask Laura to pass the presentation over to Doug for a minute and let Doug give you a quick demo of some of the richer report functionality that we've got built into Nova.
Great, thanks. And just let me make sure I'm showing the right screen. There we go. So, Paul, can you see my screen right now?
Yes, sir, I sure can.
Okay, perfect. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a quick little recap of what we have in Radar, and then we'll pivot over to Nova and show you some of the differences. And I think this becomes really clear. You know, one of the big challenges that we had in Radar is that it was often hard to find a report. You know, we have a lot of reports, and every report has a very specific thing that it kind of covers. So, you know, here's a list of mailboxes over quota. If I was trying to find a security report, there's a lot of different security reports that I would go into. And if I wanted to create a custom report as well, I had kind of a limited set of attributes that I could kind of grab on overall. And there was, you know, sometimes you could only run one certain type of report, one before the other. So now if we pivot over to Nova, so the great thing about Nova is that there's this new tool called the Report Designer, which replaces the reports themselves, a lot of the custom reports and the custom pivots, and adds a lot more functionality as well. So for example, and there are now 3 types of reports. I'll talk a little bit about this a little bit later on. We talk about kind of social sharing between them. But, you know, I have the ability to see system reports, which are a little bit like the reports we had in Radar, except that now they're much more capable and they're much more, they have a lot more information in them. And then I have the ability to create private and public reports of my own that I can then share out and send around to each other. But let's get started with the individual reports themselves. If I open up some of the individual reports, so for example, here's one on Teams usage. Previously, I would have had, you know, 4 or 5 Teams reports individually. Now it's all encapsulated into a single report. So I can see my top team users, history of the team history this month, you know, and again, some other information around call and chat history. And I have a really nice heat map as well to show you where are my clusters of people that are doing private messaging. So for example, I can see that in this particular org, my development team, you know, is very active. You know, and I can get some, you know, drill down into that as well. So that's our Teams report. If I move over to something like SharePoint settings and usage, and again, if I compare with Radar, where I had, you know, a number of SharePoint reports, but each one was kind of individual. So top sites by size, site collections, things of that nature. In Nova now, I actually have a single report, which has within that report my 100 most active sites, my 100 largest sites, what sites require check-in, what sites have versioning enabled, individual site settings, some recent site activities as well, visits per day, my most active SharePoint users, whether auditing and checkout is in, most active departments, top 10 sites by item count. I now have these really rich environments to go in. I don't have to sort of move between multiple environments. And I can also select individual bits of that information to download. So I can download this particular set of data. And I can also download the entire presentation here as its own PDF to share. I can print it, schedule it, a lot of the things that we had previously in Radar, but now I have it all encapsulated in one big report. I've also looked at another one, which is a nice mobile devices overview. Again, comparing it to Radar, I had probably somewhere in the range of 15 or individual reports. Now it's just one single report where I can see all my devices by manufacturer, device types, whether my device policies have been applied, a nice pivot chart of various devices by country, my inactive devices, my folder sync history, some recent mobile events as well. So the system reports that come canned with the actual report designer itself are a lot more capable. You also see they're a lot more vibrant. We have a lot more reporting. But what's really nice is that you can actually go in and make your own reports. And this is really where the tool manifests itself nicely. Now, one of the things that is added, so let's just we'll just call this a webinar. And when I want to create a report, I can basically go in and select the types of data that I wanted to show. So in this particular case, I have a really nice and vibrant library of charts I can choose, tables, timelines, maps, metrics. Let's just stick to the charts for now. I will then select the data source, and I'll talk a little bit about data sources with our next slide, but I'm going to select one here called Office 365 users, and I can select the types of chart that I want to show. I'm going to choose a heat map, all right? And then I can select, I have a number of additional settings that I can do with this. So in this particular case, I'm going to do a count of particular objects. I'm going to take my department and my country region, and I'm going to try to find something out. So let's see something that might be interesting. Let's stick with the mobile devices. And let's select device model and refresh the preview. And now I can see that, I have this nice little cluster, by country, who has a Galaxy, an iPhone, things of that nature. So I can see that, I still have a couple of iPhone 6s or even a 5S out there. Somebody in the United Kingdom has that. And now I have a nice visual report there. If I wanted to switch this into a pie, for example, I could also go into here. It kind of takes some default information that I had previously, but I'm going to change this and actually I'm going to make it so that, so now I can just see, what country are people in within this organization. I'm going to add a filter because I see that I have a lot of stuff here that's actually empty or is no country. And then it'll start, start filtering out that data as well as required. So a lot more functionality. This is something that's brand new. If you ever ran the previous custom reporting in Radar, you never had any capability at all to add particular charts to it. So now I can actually add charts and tables. So if I want to take a look just really quickly here, and I can add more check-ins as I want to go through here. And actually, I'm going to add just a whole bunch of stuff related to a particular organization. So I'll just add display name, department, and country. I can do some sorting here. So I can sort descending. I can actually see what's here. I can also set some offsets and some other things here to do that. And then that section might be sort of the main section that I want to have as part of this report. So I'm going to make it a full size report, and I'm going to move it up to the top. And so I have my initial report of just everybody by the particular department that they're in. I can change this right here within the report itself. And then later on, I have a table where I'm having the countries divided by pie chart. And I can even add more and more tables, timelines. There's really, I can add as much as I want within all of this there. So it's a lot more capable. So we have this concept where we're amalgamating a lot more data on our singular page. And then we're actually, adding the ability to be a lot more custom from that perspective. Paul, did you want me to handle the next slide, the next couple of slides as well, or?
Sure.
Okay, so just let me bring over.
Although I think since I have the deck shared, Laura is going to have to switch back to me so people can see it. All right, there we go. Okay, let's talk data sources now. Go with it, Doug. You're rolling.
Okay, perfect. So at the heart of all that we do within the reporting platform now, within Radar, we had back-end data sources that we exposed to a certain extent. In Nova, we want to supercharge that. So what we're actually doing is we're basically allowing you to combine any data source that we're gathering, we're using. So, one of the things that we want to do is make more and more data at your fingertips, and not even just data that we're gathering from Microsoft, but data also that the platform is calculating and doing things as well. So you can actually put that in and add all these data into as many data sources as you particularly want. Some of that is brand spanking new. Previously, you could not incorporate audit data. So the security and audit component of Radar really added a rich vein of additional information. And that information often augmented or even surpassed the information that came from the core reporting database that we were gathering. A lot of you did leverage that, but not everybody did. Now we're making it a lot more functional within Nova by meaning that you can have that data source and add it with any other data source to combine into a particular report. And I'll show some examples of that as well. We also know that in general, more and more workloads are becoming more and more important. So we will be actually dramatically expanding the amount of data that we gather from most of the workloads, but in particular Teams. Teams is one where we had also a bit of a delay for Microsoft making the data available, but also we wanted to have a better, more compelling way to show that within Nova as well. So a lot of expanded Microsoft Teams reporting. And we have a continual process now to do database expansion, database collection. So if you can pass it back to me for a second, Paul, and I'll show the data sources. So whereas previously, again, I'll do a comparison with Radar, we had basically a list of fields, and the fields were not very well sorted. So you could come in here, for example, and you could, start typing something in and, get some particular bits of information from there. But you'll have, first of all, there's no audit data. And as well, if you were trying to do something that combining SharePoint and OneDrive data and other types, we actually had two functional databases. It was very hard to get them together. Now in the Nova world, if I create a new report, and we'll do another test one, and we'll select from a table, I actually have a rich vein of data sources now. And the data sources have a couple of different iterations, and we'll give some very good guidance on what these are. So I do have the data sources now subdivided by particular workloads. So if I'm focusing on some Skype or some SharePoint or some OneDrive, I can select those individual data sources. There are things that we haven't even, new things like adoption accelerators. So we're actually have some new functionality within Nova that actually feeds its own data source as well. We'll have more and more of that as well. So governance dashboard as well. So things that we're working on become part of that. And as you see, we can kind of mix and match. And then we have some kind of omnibus data sources that gathers a lot of this information together and makes it available. And you can interact with every way you want. You can choose individual data sources and work on that, or you can actually work with some of these omnibus data sources. I'm going to work with the Office 365 data source, which is one of those omnibus ones. And it actually is an amalgam of a lot of data sources. So I have my typical Office 365 data. I also have Teams and Yammer and Office 365. So for example, if you were somebody that was trying to create a mail versus Teams comparison, you can now do that in Nova, something you couldn't do in Radar. So I'm going to choose display name and department, and I'm going to choose a 7-day messages sent column. And I'm going to choose a 7-day, and because there's a lot, so if I expand some of these, for example, you can see that there's a lot of individual data fields. I can just type in up here 7, because I just want to do these 7-day comparisons, and then it's going to filter out for me. Of course, it's not working today because it's a demo. I have to do a space. There we go. And I'm going to say that it's going to be for Teams. How many private message accounts I've had in 7 days. So I'm trying to kind of compare how much information that I'm doing within a Teams workload and an Exchange workload, and I can add anything else if I wanted as well. So again, we can't always guess necessarily what type of things that customers want. So let's say that for whatever reason you also wanted to put in the device manufacturer of their mobile device, just in case we felt that some reason that had some influence on what we have. And now I have this nice table by person, the messages sent, the messages received, and I can basically sort as well, to see who had the most individual, entries for those particular things. I can save that. Now I have that individual chart here, and I can sort of combine another data set. So if I wanted to then add another data set to this, data source to this, I can also go in on here and then add a chart with another. So let's choose one that's very specific. So for example, mail permissions is a slightly different data set. And, depending on what I want to display there, it has additional different fields, based on some of that information there as well. So a lot more comprehensive and rich data sources from that perspective. Get back to you, Paul, for the next slide, and then we'll come back and do a bit more demo.
Cool, thank you. I'm really excited about the ability to add these data sources quickly, because one thing we see from Microsoft is they continue their graph conversion. We're getting more data exposed through graph that we can now consume and turn into reporting data sources very quickly. So there's another really cool aspect to reports in Nova that is going to be new to those of you who are on Radar, which is we've made it a lot easier for you to work with and share report objects themselves. So you can think of the report like a shell that we pour data into when you display the report. So now you can take the report. You've already seen Doug using the report designer to create reports and save them. And if you looked very closely at his screen, you would see that the reports as he saved them were tagged as private. So we have different levels of access. We have system reports, which are the ones that you get with Nova. We're deploying new ones all the time, and they just automatically show up in your dashboard. There are private reports, which are the ones that you create for your own use, but then you can share those reports and make them public within your organization. Now, one thing that we did as part of building and testing this is say, you know what we need? Imagine if you could take a report and you could export it and give it to somebody else. Well, at first, this was just a test mechanism for us to share reports amongst ourselves. We figured out pretty quickly how powerful it was to let individual users or organizations build reports and share them. So we've got a new community site coming that will enable you to download reports that other people have built. But if you're a service provider or a customer that's managing multiple tenants, you also can do things such as build a report and then export it and give it to the other people who are managing your environment, even if they're in different tenants, even if you don't have any rights within that tenant. So our goal is not just to give you better tools for making reports that only you can see, but to make it easier for you to work with shared reports and share and schedule reports in ways that Radar did not support. So Doug, why don't you show us what that looks like in Nova?
Yeah, perfect. Sorry, just had to unmute myself. And this is one of the exciting aspects of the tool is that you can now take a look at something. So let's take a look, for example, at our mail traffic report. And the mail traffic report, you might go in there and you might go and say, you know what, it's pretty nice, but I actually want to do something a little bit different here. So I can actually go in, and if I wanted to edit this as a system report, I can actually clone it right now. So now it's actually making a clone of that report. And I can then go in and I can make any kind of change that I want. So let's go down here, and let's just say that we don't want this spam and malware report by day. I'm going to use a simple example, but just so we can see how the changes happen. So I go in here, I now delete that particular section. I'm not changing my system report, which is always the same. I'm going to save that now. And I now see that I actually can also see it in my list of custom reports. So now down here, this mail traffic clone, and it's marked as private. So this is just a report that's just for me. I now go in there, and we just talked about all the great features that you can do. I modify it. I make it a lot more impressive for my own organization and what it has. And I can come in here, and I can actually share it with an org. So I'm going to actually share this. I'm going to say, you know what, this is something that's really cool. I want everybody to get it. I'm going to save that. And now that shows up as if everything worked okay, that now shows up as a public report. So somebody else who logs into Nova sees that in their list already. So if you think about it, you could create, for anybody who's new to the organization, the first time they go into Nova, they can have this list of system reports and public reports. And if you ever worked with Nova and you ever worked with Radar and wanted to do that, or even share it between orgs if you're in a multi-tenant environment, that was you basically was a lot of manual work to do that. But you can also do things if something is still in a private one that you're trying to share, you can actually download the JSON file for that. So you would download that particular JSON file. And then once you had the JSON file, you could then make it available to be imported. So basically, if I then came here and said imported a JSON file, and then I can actually see a list of other reports that I had that I wanted to actually choose. And I can choose a report. And if it's a duplicate, it'll actually just create another version of it, but I can then share that. So think about the power of that now. What data wants to be free, right? So I'm able to take system reports that I love, but I want to modify from my organization, and then keep them private until I'm happy with them, then publish them, make them public, or I can massage about halfway or much as I'm happy with it, and then export it as a JSON file, then have that report come back and sent to somebody else. So a lot more of this interaction and collaborative approach, which was extremely difficult in the Radar days. Reports basically stayed within the interface, and was also stayed within the context of a particular person or organization. So a lot more extra capabilities. And then, as Paul has mentioned, we want to supercharge that by basically making it available, for you to share these really nice reports, because we're using all the same data sources, at least the fields, but set on somebody else's data itself. So you can, so we can start having this concept of seeing what other things. So, our challenge to you as Nova customers is go wild, create interesting things, learn how this data can work for you, and then share it with the world, and we'll help you share that as well. So that's it for that one. I'll pass that back to you, Paul.
Awesome. Thank you, Doug. I'm really excited about the social report sharing too. I mean, normally when you hear social, people think about cat pictures, and I'm one of the worst offenders since there's a cat about 3 feet from where I'm sitting right now. Just quickly customize them and then pass them around within or between organizations is really a game changer in terms of information sharing and analytics. Now, there's another brand new piece of Nova that we have not talked about at all. Just for time reasons, I'm not going to ask Doug or do a demo myself, but I mentioned earlier that adoption is without data, it's just shouting. So we take the data that we gather about what users are doing in your tenant. How many of them are sharing files in OneDrive? How many of them are having Teams chat conversations, but not phone calls or video calls or meetings? And then we tie that data to a campaign-based system that lets you define an audience that you want to reach and a campaign to reach them, so that you essentially can work to market adoption as something desirable. Now, I realize that sounds a little funny, right? Most of the time when we think about adoption, we think, okay, I'm going to deploy something and then my users will just automatically grab on and start using it. But what we're finding as a practical matter is that the more stuff Microsoft shovels into Office 365, the harder it is to get users to take advantage of it and use it, even when it will really make a great difference for them. It's sort of like telling kids to eat their vegetables sometimes, and other times it's even harder. It's like trying to convince people over 50 that they need to go have a colonoscopy. The benefits are supposed to be really great, but boy, you have a hard time selling that as a proposition. So with Adoption Accelerator, what we want to do is give you tools to make it easier for you to figure out who in your organization has already adopted the features that you are trying to make use of, and then reach out to the people who have not with training materials, with line of business data, with whatever content is unique to your organization that will help convince them. Now, as part of this, we include what we call a light content pack that gives you some templates and some marketing guidance and materials to help encourage people to use Teams or to use OneDrive or to stop using WebEx or whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. The nice thing about that is that content's completely customizable and you can update it or change it however you want to, but you also can use your own content if you want. So probably the biggest bullet that I want to emphasize here is this third one, that you can have multiple campaigns with different workloads, different audiences, all running at the same time. So if you imagine a world where you've got, okay, I've got to get my organization starting to use Yammer because we just deployed it. And if you wonder why I'm saying Yammer in this case, you're going to see some pretty significant announcements from Microsoft this year at Ignite, where again, I hope you'll join us in booth 841. But Microsoft is going to unwrap some stuff about Yammer that I think is going to make it much more attractive. So you should probably plan on doing some Yammer adoption in 2020, just a proactive hint. But with that said, you can simultaneously be running a campaign to get your salespeople to stop emailing attachments and start using OneDrive for file sharing, and a different campaign to get people in your European operations to start using Teams so you can get rid of your WebEx or Zoom licenses, and a different campaign throughout the entire organization to get people to start using Yammer more. All this is monitored through a dashboard that looks very similar to the multi-section reports you just saw. And we have some exciting improvements that I would be happy to talk about in our roadmap in one of those NDA discussions I mentioned earlier. So if you're an existing Radar customer, we've talked about the new reporting engine, the new reports, the ability to share reports, the data sources, Adoption Accelerator. That's the stuff that you get one for one from your existing Radar subscription when you migrate to Nova. But remember that when I talked about the Nova pillars, there's some other pretty significant pieces to it too that I want to mention as upgrade possibilities. So what this chart shows is the same 5 pillars, but with use cases spread across. So if I say, okay, my job is to do IT support and troubleshooting, or my job is to aggregate security data, or to operate the help desk, you can see that these roles draw from functionality that's in multiple pillars of Nova. And that's why we built it. The whole reason behind us building this is to let you do things that you can't easily do with point solutions. So for example, if I am the person whose job it is to do IT support, delegation and policy control lets me do that without having to give people unwanted levels of admin access. Service monitoring helps me understand what the state of the service is, so when someone files a ticket, I can more quickly localize where the outage is, and so on. So with that said, I want to talk briefly about 2 key pieces of the Nova platform that we haven't mentioned before. One is delegation and policy control, or DPC. So the 2 of the biggest problems that people have with SaaS management are, number 1, too many administrators. Every time you give someone global administrator or Intune administrator or one of the other very high privilege accounts or roles, you are making your life harder in the future. It's tempting and easy to just say, right, you need to do this task, here's global admin, go do it. But now you have to keep track of who has that access, what they did with it. Did they only do things that they were allowed to do, or did they read somebody's mail or change a setting you didn't want changed, et cetera? How do you make sure that you haven't accidentally left that role set on someone's account after they leave or after they change jobs, et cetera? It's a big pain in the butt. The other problem that you have is something I alluded to earlier, which is that, for example, if I give someone Teams administrator, they can set phone numbers, they can change direct routing configuration. There's a whole bunch of stuff that they can do that Microsoft thinks represent what a Teams administrator does. Well, guess what? The problem is I may not want the people that I am working with to have the ability to do 100% of those things. Maybe I only want them to have 50% of that access. Well, too bad. In Microsoft's world, you are either a Teams admin or you are not. You are either an Exchange admin or you are not. And there's no way to say, well, I only want this person to be able to do 4 of the things that a Teams admin can do, plus 3 of the things that an Intune admin can do, plus 1 of the things that an ordinary global admin can do. DPC allows you to go beyond those limitations and delegate any level of access to any of the actions we support to any unprivileged user account in any tenant. So what that means is I can say, oh, you know what, check this out. I'm going to give Doug access to manage certain things for Quadratec operations in Canada because that's where he's based, but only certain things. He can't touch anything in the EU, he can't touch anything in the US, and he can't touch anything outside the scope of what I want to let him have. So this enables use cases for things like this first one, the HR rep. That's something we actually do at Quadratec. So I have an HR representative who sits at a desk in Bristol in England who is allowed to onboard and offboard EU users. And what's really fascinating about that, because of our environment, what that means is she has permission to, through a delegated account, she has permissions to create or remove on-prem AD accounts because we create our users on-prem and then they're dir synced to the cloud. So think about that for a second. She doesn't have to have global admin. She doesn't have to have domain admin or enterprise admin on the on-prem side. She can go straight to the DPC portal in Nova and onboard a user without having to have any administrative permissions anywhere. Okay, then we have the case of Help Desk Harry. You can see all kinds of scenarios where you want some people to be able to do some things against some set of targets, but you don't want everybody to be able to do everything everywhere. Sum this up by saying that we're both more flexible, less expensive, and easier to use than Microsoft's privileged identity or privileged access management, the PIM and PAM twins. Now, service monitoring. This is super important. We run into the scenario all the time where a user suspects that there's a problem with the service and they call the help desk. This has been my life throughout the existence of Office 365, and probably some of you have suffered this same problem. So you never really know if it's a problem with the service, if it's a problem with the user's network, if it's a problem with her device. You can't tell. Microsoft doesn't give you enough tools to tell. And there could be a full-blown forest fire of an outage that could be going on for hours before it makes it into Microsoft's Service Health dashboard. We saw that happen with the last big MFA outage about a year ago. That sucker was flaming for probably 6 or 7 hours before it showed up as a Service Health notification. So we're going to fix that. What you get with service monitoring in Nova, which is included with the reporting package, by the way, is you get access to a global network of beacons. Each beacon is showing you availability data about a specific Microsoft data center and the services that are hosted there. So you can add to that by adding your own beacons that manage or that gather availability data from where your users are. So at Quadratec, for example, I would put one of those in Huntsville, Alabama. I'd put one of those in Bristol. I'd put one in London. I'd put one in Žilina and in Námestovo in Slovakia. And I might scatter a couple around. Maybe I'd put one at the CEO's ski chalet. The point is, then on the map, not only do I get the global view, but I get individual local views for where my employees actually are. So that when one of them says, hey, I can't get my email, or hey, OneDrive isn't working, guess what? Now I have a way to go look and see what is the service actually doing. You can see from the screenshot, AutoDiscover is working. It's taking just under 10 seconds, creating email with and without attachments, creating folders. Those tests are all passing. The minute one of those turns red, boom, I get a notification telling me, hey, it looks like in Sao Paulo, AutoDiscover is failing because it's taking too long. Or AutoDiscover is failing because authentication is failing. Now I have a proactive notification that I can use to guide my service response. The other piece, which I believe I mentioned earlier, is the ability to take this SLA data and turn it into reports that you can use to show and track what availability looks like over time. Now, the last feature I want to talk about, and I realize this is of great interest to some people and zero interest to others, is the ability to do all these things across and between tenants. So in a single report, I could say, oh, I want to take some data from tenant A and data from tenant B and combine them. So I want to see my top 10 mailboxes across 2 tenants. Okay, no problem. Or I want to, from one tenant, look at another. So I'm Microsoft and I'm managing a tenant for another customer. I want to be able to look at that customer's data without having to have a delegated account in that tenant. Well, we can do that too. The use cases for migration awareness, for DPC, when you think about what you can do with seamless any-to-any tenant support, it's huge, right? It's huge for M&A. It's huge for companies that are dealing with multiple tenants because they've had mergers or acquisitions or because people have set up their own tenants. It's usable for service providers, test labs, you name it. Any place you have more than one tenant, this functionality works, and it just works. You can see here in the screenshot that what I've done is taken one of my partner organizations, I've created a virtual organizational unit called customers, and I've embedded some tenants under it. And you can see all these entries that say .onmicrosoft.com. Those are the actual tenants. So I can actually create a virtual tenant that Nova can manage. It's made up of multiple Office 365 tenants. Just fascinating. I mean, the technology behind what we're doing is fascinating to me, but then again, I'm a nerd. So close it out, your call to action. You're using Radar right now. If you want to move to Nova, and I think you probably will after having seen this, especially Doug's demos, then know that Radar is going to stick around for a while. Okay, we are moving people as quickly as we can and as quickly as they want to. And we would like to get you included in that. But in the interim, right now, Nova is available and you can use it. Radar will remain available and you can use it. We're not asking you to do the migration work yourself. What we're doing instead is through our support system, scheduling a concierge moving service is basically the way that I like to think of it. So all you need to do to get the process started is send an email to support@quadratec-it.com, and they can get you in the migration queue. The migration itself is pretty quick. The more data you have, the longer it takes, but it doesn't take a long time in any regard. It's just not something that you can initiate self-service yet. Then when you do that, you get better reporting, the new Teams features, the ability to tie audit log data in, the multi-tenant support, shareable reports, all the other things that I've talked about are yours. So with that said, Laura, do we have any questions? I know we've gone just a little bit long, and I appreciate everybody's patience in sticking around for this.
Yep, so we do have a couple. One of them is, in the move from Radar to Nova, will the existing reports and scheduled reports be carried over?
So short answer, existing reports, not exactly. In that the reports that we have in Radar have counterparts in Nova, but it's not necessarily one-to-one. So for example, the mail traffic report that you see in Nova combines multiple separate reports in Radar. The interesting piece there is about scheduled reports. And Doug, I'm probably be better to let you answer that so that I don't muff the technical details.
So right now, because as you said, the reports are very different, you will have to reschedule the existing process right now is that you will have to reschedule those reports, but we'll look at how we can automate them potentially in the future. But don't forget, you're going from a very different report structure, so there's not a perfect analogy to the reports that were previously in Radar. But scheduling is available in Nova, and you can reproduce those, but unfortunately, it is a manual process for the scheduling in particular.
Yep, that's what I would have said, along with the other caveat that the scheduled reports you have now, you can probably do better with the new tools. You can make richer reports so that you end up with possibly a smaller number of scheduled reports that have more data in them. So as Doug said, we plan to include automatic migration of scheduled reports, but for now, you'll probably be better off to build reports that have exactly what you want in them and then schedule them in Nova instead of just doing a one-for-one replacement.
Yep, and then one more quick question, will I lose any data? And I'm guessing that means more of the historical data.
Your historical data gets migrated 100%.
Yeah, and I can actually add some, and it's not even so much that's being migrated. We actually point to the same database. So the database is maintained. So Radar points to this database, and Nova points to this database. So there's nothing lost because there's no actual change in the infrastructure for the data itself.
All right.
And during the time that you're doing the conversion, you can switch back and forth between Radar and Nova, and changes to the data will be reflected in both.
Perfect. Another question, can reports still be downloaded into CSV files?
That's pending. So right now it's PDF. Well, sorry. Yes, you can. The report sections. So the individual report sections, but not the report as a whole. So the answer is a qualified yes, but you have to do it by section as opposed to the entire report itself. But that is actually pretty close to what we had in Radar as well.
Okay, and then another one is, you indicated Nova is free during our existing subscription. What can we expect after our subscription related to pricing?
So you need to get a dump truck full of money and drive it to Doug's house. No, seriously, and I forget, that joke goes over better in live where you can see me rolling my eyes when I say that. We priced Nova to be very, very aggressively, I would say. I don't want to get into the exact pricing details because without knowing where in the world you're located and how many users you have, I would probably get it wrong. But we are pricing this very competitively, both with Radar and significantly below what our competitors in this space are asking. So I think the short answer is you will be pleasantly surprised. If you want to shoot me a note directly, I can put you in touch with the right sales folks for your area, and you can have that discussion in more depth.
All right, and then one more quick question. Is there an increase in fees to move from Radar to Nova? So I'm not sure if this was discussing the pricing like the last question or the transition itself. So maybe you can address that.
Right, so no, there's no cost for you to transition. We do that as part of your existing subscription. That's one of the beauties of SaaS, is that when you buy a SaaS service, the service and support should be included. That's at least the business model we've adopted. So there's no cost to you to migrate. There's no cost to you to continue using Nova throughout Nova reporting and adoption throughout the rest of your existing Radar subscription term.
All right, it seems like that is all the questions that we've had. Again, I'll take a look and make sure I didn't miss any, but since we're a bit short on time, don't want to hold anyone any longer. We'll follow up with the rest of the questions over email, and the recording will be sent out within the next 24 hours.
All right, thank you, Laura, for moderating. Thank you very much, Doug, for your demos and background knowledge, and thank you all for attending. Enjoy your Tuesday and go have some tacos. It's Taco Tuesday.
Thank you, everybody.